session of Congress has begun with a prayer to the biblical God until last year, when they opened up with a prayer to the false god of Islam. Now, George Washington is known as the father of our nation. He was the commander of the Continental Army and our first president. He ended his oath to the presidency by saying, "So help me God," as he bent down to kiss the Bible. Our second president was John Adams. This founding father stated our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other, which probably answers a lot of the issues we see before us today. Our third president was Thomas Jefferson. He was the principal author of the Declaration, which continually refers back to the biblical God. Now, our history today teaches he was a Christian skeptic or a deist. However, as president, he attended Christian church services held in both the U.S. Capitol building and in the Supreme Court buildings. He wrote the education plan for D.C. schools using the King James Bible as the primary reading book. It's clear he wanted this nation founded on Christian principles. In fact, Jefferson wrote to those who said he was a Christian skeptic, stating that his beliefs were the result of a life of inquiry and reflection, and much different from the anti-Christian system imputed to him by those who knew nothing about his opinions. Our fourth president was James Madison. James Madison is known as the principal author of the First Amendment's Religion Clause. So if anyone would know about a separation of church and state, this would be the man. As president, he attended Christian church services held in the U.S. Capitol building, and he promoted hiring pastors for both the House and the Senate, using federal funds to pay for their salaries. But what about that separation of church and state that's found in the First Amendment? Nowhere in the U.S. Constitution is such a phrase mentioned. In fact, the First Amendment begins, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." This clearly prohibits the government from sponsoring an official government religion, like, as an example, maybe spending billions of taxpayer dollars to teach secular humanism, which is based on naturalism, which is based on millions of years leading to Darwinism. It's being taught as science today. It's not science, it's an anti-science religious belief. And this leaves religious activities to the discretion of the people of each individual state to decide upon for themselves. In other words, the federal government isn't supposed to have a say in the matter whatsoever. This was meant to protect religious activities, not to undermine our Christian-based freedoms. In fact, Madison stated that we have staked the whole future of American civilization not upon the power of the government, but upon the capacity of each of us to govern ourselves according to the 10 Commandments of God. It's clear that the Founding Fathers intended to keep the federal government out of the church while keeping Christian principles in the government. Why? So the government would not become corrupted, which probably addresses some of the issues we see today also. I won't go into that either right now. But in the late 1700s, when the ink had hardly dried on the Constitution, believe it or not, Europe's Age of Reason had invaded the United States. This was a group of man-made philosophies which tried to answer life's questions and get God out of the picture. And believe it or not, the people of the United States and the church itself once again turned its back on the true biblical God. But here's something very important to understand. They still held to that creation-based foundation. They still understood a perfect creation corrupted by man's sin that had separated them from their loving Creator. They still understood the need for redemption. In fact, many Christian schools like Yale and Harvard have become secular, just like many of today's Christian schools have become. But in 1795, Yale appointed Timothy Dwight as their new president, and he began urging seniors to return to serving God with their lives. One of those seniors was Lyman Beecher, who became a pastor. And in the 1820s, Pastor Lyman Beecher began preaching, "Christ died for your sins." Most churches, again, slammed the door in his face, so he went out in the public squares and fields and began preaching, "Christ died for you." God poured forth His blessing yet again, and the crowds grew to the thousands. And we had the Second Great Awakening in this nation as we united again as one nation under God. The Second Great Awakening was underway. It was in 1835 that Alexis de Tocqueville visited here from France, and he wrote that Americans combine the notions of Christianity and liberty so intimately in their minds that it's impossible to make them conceive one without the other. In 1835, Americans couldn't even conceive having liberty without it being based on Christian principles. In 1848, the cornerstone of the Washington Memorial was laid down. Inside it were placed copies of the Constitution, the Declaration, and the King James Bible. Christian references are found engraved throughout that stone structure. The Capitol building was dedicated in 1858. Christian engravings are found throughout those stone walls, such as "America, God shed His grace on thee," and "In God we trust." If you enter the rotunda, you'll find 18-foot wide paintings ringing the rotunda. 3 out of 4 have Christian-based themes, like Pocahontas being baptized. To enter the main chamber, you pass through a room that has marble reliefs of 22 of the world's history's greatest lawmakers. There will be 11 on your left and 11 on your right. They're all facing as if they're going in also, so you only see the sides of their faces. Over the main door, the one person they're all facing is facing back to you. You see his entire face? That person is Moses. In fact, stained glass in the Capitol building's chapel depict George Washington kneeling to pray under a sign that states, "This nation under God." It was the Second Great Awakening that led the crusade to finally abolish slavery in this nation. In fact, the Battle Hymn of the Republic included the words, "As Christ died to make men holy, let us die to make men free." And the great Christian heritage that this country has that has been stolen from our children is that though we were founded in a world full of slavery, 600,000 Americans died in the war to free the slaves. That's the great heritage we should be teaching our kids. Abraham Lincoln said the Bible is the best gift God has given to man. We could not know right from wrong without it. Once again, shedding light on the problems we have today. Ulysses S. Grant was the commander